Welcome to the Tech Insider podcast. I'm your host, Nick Hume, founder of Hume Consulting, specializing in digital infrastructure, technical diligence, and next-gen cooling solutions. Tech Insider will discuss leadership, strategy, and technology trends with industry-leading executives all around the world. In today's episode, I sit down with Claudine Ogilvie. Claudine is a technology executive and entrepreneur with impressive roles as CIO of Jetstar Group and Ridley Corporation, a GM at KPMG. And Claudine's new focus, she's the founder of a new company called HivePix, an optimization solution helping businesses manage and secure their supply chains. We chat about data warehouses, privacy, quantum computing, and bees. Hope you enjoy. Tell us all about it.
Fantastic. So HivePix, I'm really excited to be working on this. We are brand new, so we've only recently incorporated, as you mentioned, but we've already got some fabulous pull in the marketplace. And so what we do is we connect and orchestrate product data across complex supply chains. So what that means is that we're solving for three key problem statements. One is supply chain connectivity. I'll come back to that as to why that's important. Data fragmentation within your environment. And if you put supply chain connectivity and data fragmentation, or if you can solve for those two things together, you can then deliver regulatory reporting through the supply chain, like Scope 3 sustainability reporting, or even better manage product recalls through the supply chain and things like that. So that's really exciting, and no one's, to our knowledge, really been able to do that in the way that we are. So that's what we do.
So no known competitors.
There are plenty of competitors all along that value chain. When we talk about supply chain connectivity at the moment, most organizations, they will communicate product data. And what I mean by that is if I sell you a pen, you need to give me, or I need to give you all the data relating to that pen. What's the color, what the product codes, the specifications, all that sort of jazz. And that usually today comes in the form of a big Excel spreadsheet, CSV file, etc., which I will then send to you, email to you, etc. So incredibly manual. And the reason that happens is that you get these really big organizations with complex supply chains, so lots and lots of suppliers, usually hundreds of suppliers. If you're thinking of like the likes of a Home Depot, they're not going to spin up an API with every single one of the hundreds of APIs for each of those suppliers, right? It just makes no sense.
Absolutely.
So this is the most efficient way of doing it. Some organizations might have supplier portals, which helps to efficiently ingest all this information into their systems. But it's still a manual process for all those suppliers putting data and information into those systems. So what the Hive does is we have a data Hive, and you connect into our Hive once as a supplier or even a client, and that gives you access to however many clients we have in the Hive and however many suppliers we have in the Hive with their product catalogs, etc. And it also means that not only are you ingesting that data in a more automated fashion, you're getting rid of manual errors, a lot of the manual processes that are associated with it. But you can also do things like, I've got to stock out. I don't have any more of this pen, but are there other pens that meet the same spec that are within that product catalog, or even product catalogs from multiple suppliers? And then you can sort of do some product matching, etc., in that fashion.
Well, that kind of reminds me, just what you just said then, it reminds you almost of the inferencing engine in like an Amazon. It's like people who like this pen also liked actually it's a sub replacement.
It's a little more specific, but yes.
Swapping
absolutely
as relevant to meet specific criteria. Does it work best with physical goods for company, like you talked about Home Depot, like a Walmart or like a grocery store or something? Are they the best use cases? Like lots of small SKUs, lots of are harder to track. Therefore, the more data, the better. Sort of works on a HivePix scenario.
Absolutely. So we do specialize in product data. We're not delving into services or anything like that. And primarily because a product is still a product is still a product, whatever happens to it across the supply chain. So the second use case I mentioned was fragmented data. So, and then, if you have a pen that goes into your system, say you've gotten past the supplier connectivity piece, it's now it's now in your ERP system perhaps, but usually that data sits in half a dozen systems. It's your ERP system, it's your asset management system, CRM, you might even have a product information management system, usually a warehousing system. And so, that pen might sit with your finance manager, and you might say, hey, my one source of truth is my ERP system. That's all very nice. But usually what happens is then you've got your marketing manager who might sit there and go, oh, I'm going to change the name of this pen. I'm going to bundle it with some notepads. I'm going to change the price point, the definition of a unit, which is one that's a big pain point often. And then, I'm going to upload that onto the website. I'm going to sell some of those. It'll go back to, say, the warehouse, and the warehouse goes, great, we've sold 500 units of these pen and notepad combos. And then you try to reconcile it internally with your systems. And it's like, which pen is it? Is it the one that came in from the manufacturer originally, or is it this diff pen that's described completely different, that's come from the marketing system that got uploaded, which is the information that's actually being used by your clients?
Yes.
So, there are usually systems internally to deal with that already today, but it is manual and there are lots of errors, and you get a lot of product returns associated with that. For example, is just one of the pain points that we solve for. But the Hive lifts all that up and basically goes, we accept that in every organization you're going to have big sophisticated systems, and we don't want to replace them. We sort of accept the fragmentation, but we want to connect those up such that we are creating one source of the truth, the Holy Grail, I would say, in some respects for data governance. And so we can upload into our rules engine. We go, okay, it's because it's more than integration. It's more than just an integration piece of software. It will understand that the commercial part of the product data, the one source of truth, is in finance. And if that changes, then it's automatically updated in all other systems. Or maybe the name of a product, you're happy for marketing just to have complete control over that. And if they change it, that you're okay if that automatically updates all the other systems, etc. And you can also layer in some governance checks and balances in that as well. So over here, you've got the Hive that creates this one source of the truth, so that as a product travels through your system and the supply chain, you still know, despite the fact that you've changed the name and updated the product data, you may have even changed the nature of the definition of a unit. Now it's a pen and a notepad, that you can still track that pen all the way through your systems and the supply chain, knowing what it is, how and where it's come from. And so that's pretty important. It's more difficult to do that with services because I think the source of truth is a little bit more subjective, and it's more difficult to sort of track a service. What is the nature of your service? What is its origin? And is it really important that you can do that? I don't know.
Well, that problem statement gives me hives, literally. So like, so I don't know if that's where it came from. This is like put Hive in front of, but like, I can't imagine, I mean, just like, I think that's a lot of what you're solving for is incredibly complex. And I don't think anyone really, unless you're in it, would understand how difficult, challenging, how much potential wastage and unknown errors and all those, everything in between, even if it ran well, right? So like, forgetting if it runs poorly, then, it's just chaos. Even if it runs well, it's probably still today, still chaos to some degree. So yeah, that's, and so then what do people do today? They just have spreadsheets everywhere, just tons and tons of, XOS.
Lots of spreadsheets, lots of manual processes, and the further you work out into the supply chain, the more manual it is, for obvious reasons, because you're working across companies. But even within a company, you might have a complex architecture of if you have a more sophisticated company of integrations, you might be using one of the big integration companies. I don't know if you want to mention names on this podcast, but but they work well, except that they're heavy, they're expensive, they can be really difficult to unpick as well. And so they're just not agile. So if, for example, you decide to upgrade your ERP system, that's a nightmare in itself, or even just plug and play a new CRM system or any of your systems and architecture. And typically it's a mishmash of it could be a few brand new cutting edge pieces of software. And then also you're going to have your legacy systems that have been there for a long time that you just can't unplug. And so when you look at this, your ecosystem, typically it's going to change, and you want to be able to evolve it iteratively. So every year you're changing, you're upgrading, you're improving, you're bringing in a new system. And if you've got a HivePix, you can just plug and play once. So you integrate once, and then it feeds into all the other systems that are already integrated into the Hive. Whereas if you have existing, I'm going to say some of the existing architectures and integrations, usually they're integrations that go from system, there are dependencies. You unplug one and the rest, everything breaks.
Yes.
So look, companies have made it work. It's not like they haven't got some solutions in place, but it's expensive, it's complex, and it's definitely not agile.
Yeah. Wow. So then you've got a couple, you probably can't mention names, but you're working with well, maybe you can, but you're working with some companies around the world on that, and doing some, is it POC? Is it production? Is it somewhere in between? Like how does it look today?
We're still really early. We incorporated at Christmas, and so we're working on POCs largely at the moment. We're still working on product market fit, but it's going really well. So we're doing this with a chemist network and franchisor, which has an incredibly complex supply chain ecosystem where you have a lot of the key suppliers, and some of the big ones that supply most pharmacies and chemists, like say a Johnson and Johnson and a GlaxoSmithKline. So they supply products and medication and even fast moving consumer goods, as you can imagine in your pharmacy. But they provide those into a distributor. But they work with, having said that, they also work with the franchisor on the commercials. And then the distributor deals with invoicing, orders, and payments directly with the pharmacies, who are all their own unique entities. And then the pharmacies, though, they then communicate, say, inventory and manage demand management and sort of commercial and rebates back with the franchisor. So you've just got this really complex ecosystem of information going in all sorts of directions. And at the moment, it is largely manual and largely Excel based. They don't have real-time visibility. And you can imagine for any, if there are any product recalls, it is a difficult manual process to track that back through that supply chain.
Yeah.
So the Hive will replace all of that over time with just connecting to the Hive once, and the Hive will, you'll build in your rules. Where do you want your data to go, and how do you want it to go? And it will simply automate all of those and solve quite a long list of seemingly small but painful problems for each of those players. So that's just an example of one of a number of the players we're working with.
That's really cool.
So we work sort of at our ecosystem level, I think, but we usually start with one player who puts their hand up and says, we need help, or this could really be improved.
Totally. Well, again, you walk into a pharmacy or a chemist or a drugstore here in the States, and it's just, I was in this morning getting my cholesterol medication, and so which is, you walk in, they're selling, seasonal things for, Memorial Day or Easter or, whatever it is. And then next to it is like medication to make your, hair not fall out or whatever, right? So you got everything in between. Again, I'm getting hives thinking about the complexity of managing those things. In a similar way, like completely off topic, but I would be the world's worst restaurant owner or chef that's managing a restaurant because I can do one thing really well. Like, you're on the eggs, poached eggs is there, great. But like trying to do toast and spinach and all this other stuff at the same time, it's like, not cooking is not my forte.
Well, that's an excellent segue in saying that another key sweet spot for us is the food industry, food manufacturing industry, because they have products that go through the supply chain.
Totally.
Traceability and visibility is really important. But what happens, as you can imagine, is these products get layered on with other products. So you add, flour and then sugar and then, and all these ingredients. So as you go through that supply chain, you need a system that's capable of tracking, tracing, but also layering all these data elements associated with that product. And so product or ingredients A, B, and C now make product Z, right? And that's what's being sold on. And so that's sort of a sweet spot. Also, why the pharmaceutical industry has been interested for the same reasons.
Totally.
Yeah.
You just reminded me, as you've spoken about that, is I should introduce you to my brother-in-law. He spent a lot of time doing a back of house, orchestration software to manage all that stock, right? Because,
Yeah.
all the stock take and, making sure that when you get a delivery, a pallet of, alcohol or food or whatever you're getting, it's that you're getting everything you paid for and it gets there and it's like, and so automating that entire process. So that would apply,
Fantastic.
that would be applicable outside of the hospitality industry, but equally just like yours does for outside of, retail and other things as well. It's just management of things, right? Inventory and stock and all kinds of stuff.
Spot on. I'd be delighted to chat to him because I mean we partner with a lot of we're working on a number of partnerships actually with people who have devised these fantastic and sophisticated systems like yours for inventory management. And we don't want to play in that space, but we know the Hive can augment and make all those systems better, just because of the quality of the data that's going into it, right? Because it is great data that's traceable, trackable, all the way through the supply chain. And if you have that, and for in your brother's example, you then get improved perhaps demand management, predictive algorithms around the demand management, perhaps, etc. Less stock outs, all that sort of jazz.
That's interesting. The just one last question on you talk about a lot of supply chains and difficulty. Did the idea come up during COVID when supply chains was very challenging and really impacted in a negative way, as a result of COVID and supply of everything to everyone at the same time?
No, well, no, actually. So it was post-COVID. My original co-founder, Melissa Hayes, and I sat down last year only, and we did this big brainstorm, and we were wondering, okay, where has this come from? She has deep and lived experience in complex supply chains, in that sort of product management and marketing space, and so she has grappled with a lot of that side of the problem statement, if you want. And she was saying there must be a better way, and we, this would solve, a realm of problems around sort of manual handling of data. And there are examples in that space where you have product management teams in industrial products companies, which is where her experiences come from. They spend up to 50% of their time manipulating Excel spreadsheets so that they can look after their clients essentially with product data, with what they need, with product updates, with all that jazz. I'm sorry, but what a waste of time. It's like, when you could automate all of that. So she sort of had that side of the problem statement, and I'm sort of the other side of the coin. I was like, you know what? This feeds right into that one source of the truth problem that CIOs have been grappling with for like forever,
And
and
probably still worth.
and yeah, and still are, right? And it's sort of, but I think together we came up with a bit of an epiphany. You know, if you marry her expertise and my tech background, and we sort of said, you know what, we can solve for this, and there is a solution, and that's where it started. And we've also now onboarded some more amazing people who have contributed to evolving that value proposition, to what it is today. We've got Chris Walsh, who is our CTO, and he's like building the Hive. He's amazing, and he's the ex-CIO for John Holland, a big construction company
Yes.
in
Yep.
Australia. Yeah, and then we've got Galen Rothrock, who's based out of San Francisco, actually, and she's done the whole startup ecosystem out of Silicon Valley, but also ex-Oracle. So she understands complex back-end systems, and she's amazing expertise in data and data strategy. And then you've got Colin, who is our Chief Growth Officer. And Colin, Colin Dominish, he used to lead the Lend-Lease Podium business, which for your international viewers, Lend-Lease is a big, again, construction company, and they do big skyscrapers, and
Yes.
and the Podium business is the digital twin business. So they basically build buildings. The digital twins of buildings, and then you have thousands and thousands of materials, from steel rods to washing machines
light
to fit
fittings,
this, everything, to fit these buildings. And this digital twin has to sift through all this data to understand what fits, what doesn't, and it sort of pre-populates. But to get the data in from the hundreds of suppliers is a manual nightmare as well, for example.
Sure.
So, and then we've got Tanya Kane, and she's our Chief Financial Officer, or Chief Financial B, as you say. We've got a B metaphor going on.
Yes.
And she's been a CFO for pharmaceuticals organizations, and also for Youi Insurance, which is where I met her because I was on board there.
Very cool.
Superhero team, and each of them have their own unique perspectives and insights and industry insights and experiences that have evolved HivePix to what it is today.
That's very cool. So I'll ask a question on bees, just and we can move on. But I was just curious, like, is it true that beekeepers eat more honey? That's something else.
I wonder whether it's like, working in a chocolate factory, whereas you have too much chocolate, you're done, kind of thing. It's like, it's great for the first few days, and
and then it's just you're done.
But I could say that the HivePix B team, where we could be apiarists, and we are expert at our craft. we make honey for other companies. We don't eat it ourselves.
There you go. Exactly. That's good. That's good. Very cool. So I was curious. So you talked about a lot of kind of Australian companies there, like Lend-Lease, John Holland. Well, not necessarily only Australian. They're international. Have their expansions out, but a lot of them big in Australia. And so, like, just recently, and it just sort of came up topically, I think it was earlier this week, was the Australian budget came out. And by the way, just full disclaimer, not financial advice, and I'm certainly not an economist or even a journalist. I don't even, none of these things are natural. But I was just reading it because I stay in touch. Obviously, I am Australian and I've been in the States now for 8 years, and stay really loosely in touch with Australian politics and news. And the Australian budget came out, and the Treasurer hands that thing down, and everyone always poo-hoos it and talks about what's good, what's bad. And I was just curious because, I've spent a lot of time in the AI space, and you talked about digital twins before. Obviously, that all runs on infrastructure that I'm, very used to and aware of, and use a lot of power, use a lot of money, all the things. And it talked about the budget being like 39.9, essentially 40 million bucks over 5 years. So really spread out and sprinkled for AI and technology. And I was like, gosh, that's not going to buy a lot of things or go a lot of ways, whether it's public or privately, distributed. Like, I don't know, you've been in the States now for a week and a half or so, and I think you head back tomorrow, but maybe that's been, out of sight, out of mind, and you'll go back to sort of, the news cycle over there. But have you seen that? Many thoughts about it? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't deep dived, I'm going to be honest, into the Australian budget. I have been focused on the States this week.
Yes.
But I suspect there are some pockets of money that have been stashed away, perhaps under different banners. National infrastructure, one that comes to mind.
Okay.
But also, like a week ago, really interesting, which must be a separate bucket to what you're talking about, or I'm not quite sure how that sort of come together. But the government announced that it's going to spend $940 million with a company called PsiQuantum, which
Okay.
I believe are an American company, but they have two Australian founders. And the commitment is to build the first fault-tolerant computer in Queensland.
Okay.
And I think they've committed to doing that within the next 5 years. So that would be huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. For the government to spend almost $1 billion on this commitment alone, I think shows that Australia wants to get serious about quantum computing, and it doesn't want to be left behind on this next wave, I think, of what will be a future big disruption,
Yeah.
near future.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't aware. I'm in quantum. I've always, and you're a quantum like knowledge queen of knowledge of this stuff. Since, I mean, we've only known each other for a short time, but from you speak a lot about quantum. You've done a lot of courses on quantum. You're very well educated and across a lot of things. It's always been sort of 5-10 years in the future of like we're getting close, but it seems like there's been more progress of late. And so that kind of 5-year window seems to be sort of, 3 to 4 years now instead of 5 to 10. Seems a bit more realistic. But explain it like I'm five. What is quantum? What progress has been made? What progress is still to be made? And then I can ask him more questions, maybe.
Firstly,
Before it
I
goes
think
all
you're
the
being
way over
very
my head and then I get lost.
yeah, no. No, firstly, I think you're being very kind about my expertise in quantum. I would consider myself a quantum curious person. I have done a number of courses. I have deep dived, but nothing like some of the quantum physicists that you see out there who are the real experts, and who are doing absolutely incredible things at the moment. But I am passionate about the topic, and particularly passionate about bridging the amazing breakthroughs that are going on out there. This is what gets me going with business today, and I think we're not ready for quantum, and as you say, I think that horizon has moved a lot closer than I think many companies realize, although there's plenty of preparation. So what is quantum? Quantum, I think there are three broad fields of quantum. I'm gonna dig into the quantum computing, but there's also quantum communication, and which is another field, which there's a bit of overlap with quantum computing, particularly in the space of say cybersecurity.
Okay.
And there's so there are a number of different fields. But if we look at just quantum computing, if we think classical computers have bits and they have ones and zeros, whereas quantum have qubits and they can be ones and zeros at the same time. So this is amazing when you think about what that means for the power that can sit behind a quantum computer and the types of problems it can crack. There are some challenges, obviously, with qubits in that to measure them, they collapse into a state of 1 and 0. And we will come back to this idea of collapsing and the coherence of the qubit, which is some of the challenges that we have with scaling quantum computers.
Okay.
But in addition to being superimposed, so ones and zeros at the same time, you can entangle two qubits such that they're if they're subsequently separated and then observed, at that point their results are inevitably correlated, but they don't necessarily talk to each other, right? So this is really puzzling, and no one's really been able to explain it. Yeah, and no one knows what's going on here, right? So and that drives me a little bit batty as well. I'm like, what do you mean you don't know? But even Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. So even he didn't know what was going on. But it's observable. It's predictable, and we can work with it, which has led to quantum computing today. And quantum computers can do some really, amazing things. And you touched on some of them, and they're really good at optimization problems, for example. And there are a number of companies out there dabbling in optimization problems. So the finance industry to optimize a portfolio, for example, or but it also is very, very good, as you can imagine, of stimulating quantum systems, or saying systems at a quantum level. So if you look at atoms and chemistry, for example, chemistry problems, and at the moment, we don't know how in nature fertilizer is naturally occurring. For example, we to create fertilizer, we put all these chemicals under intense pressure, to create the fertilizers that we have today. Whereas quantum computer could probably crack the problem of how this occurs naturally in nature that we can't crack today. There are just too many permutations that are possible. So that's just one little example.
Yeah.
But it's huge, and as you sort of mentioned, it is getting closer. In December of 2022, President Joe Biden signed the Quantum Computing Preparedness Act. So that's sort of how serious things are starting to get. People are worried that businesses and governments alike are exposed because we're not ready for what's coming. Because quantum computers, one of the key things, I think, for business, if I was to think about what are the key things that there's the opportunity and a lot of the amazing problems that it could potentially solve, and you touched on that. But there's also a threat element in cyber. Shor's algorithm that underpins all the cybersecurity protocols will likely be broken. It won't be, phase one of a quantum computer, but maybe phase 2 or 3, it will happen, and we know it's coming. And so, a lot of governments and businesses alike around the world are starting to work on, well, what does this mean?
It's almost like any innovation, technology leap, jump. I mean, even generative AI, right? So how can it be used against us, and how could it be a bad actor, you do the wrong thing? And you think about hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's been deployed, and I mean, quantum is going to be of a similar scale, if not more. They're almost honeypots for bad actors, or folks wanting to do the wrong thing. It becomes more and more difficult. And what ends up happening is, as you know, those technologies are distilled and, it gets smaller and more, cheaper and commoditized over time. I don't think it would be maybe hopefully commoditized in our lifetime, and that'd be a great problem to have. But then it comes with all that, fear, unknown, and doubt that comes with, when you have great power, you have all this great responsibility, because it ends up, it can be, used in the wrong way for the wrong purpose, and cause, some significant impacts. And to your point, like cracking security things, or breaching and publicly, spilling out everyone's personal information, or racking up some debt with someone on behalf of someone else. And so, like, just all kinds of bad, nasty things that can happen as a result. And I'm surprised. I mean, sort of surprised. I mean, there's clusters of thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands of GPUs today, and I'm sort of curious about what your thoughts are with how, if the GPUs and the digital infrastructure today, that's what I kind of know and love, and that's a kind of a today thing, but I see quantum kind of being the next evolutionary kind of step beyond that. Do you see them as independent on a timescale perspective? Yeah, but if quantum was now, and you had we were 5 years in the future, but we were pulled into today, would you see them as augmenting each other, supplementing each other? Like, how they're solving for different things, I think is sort of what I think they do.
Well, classical computing is not going away, and certainly not
Yeah.
going away anytime soon. I think classical computers and quantum computers are good at doing different things. I mean, yes, quantum is going to completely revolutionize most industries, and some more than others, and it's going to be incredible. And it's going to completely change the cybersecurity landscape. But we still need classical computers, and even the quantum computers you're going to see built in the near future, and probably I think into the medium and long-term future, that they'll end up looking like some kind of a hybrid, to be honest. I mean, even if you think about some of the problems it's cracking, I mean, you don't need a quantum computer to read your emails. All the basic everyday stuff that we do today.
Sure.
And hopefully email goes away one day.
I
But
mean,
yeah,
that's on my
you
wish
know,
list. Like, hey, when
you
quantum,
know,
like,
yes,
I want my
quantum sort this
inbox
out for me.
zero.
But yeah, AI is going to continue to be absolutely relevant. We're going to continue to need GPUs and computers to run our AI. Where you know that there are synergies, there is, I mean, quantum computer can probably help with how do you you know how do you help AI and ML ingest data better, more efficiently, learn with less data, learn. I mean, there's a whole, that optimization problem there when you're looking at AI and ML, the AI and ML challenge, um, and how much power you need to run all of that off. I'd like to think quantum computing can help solve for some of those issues, and then work with classical computers to making that. I mean, that's whole next level of AI, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to be quantum computing alone or AI alone. It's going to be those two technologies working together to deliver something quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I think,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say it's there's a lot of physics involved. Like, I mean, these GPUs and things came from physics acceleration on video games, and so it's gone more and more parallel and wider and broader and more powerful. And so the digital twin side, and there's like the visualization side. There's all kinds of different things. And so maybe, you know, it's that a good unit. What's the word? Like, there's a good synergy between the two over time, and so, you know, there's good use cases for each, and you know, the practicality of having both working on the same problem doesn't make any sense, but it does for the very big, large, you know, ambiguous, nebulous clouds over here. Maybe that's a good quantum solve, and then the more practical things kind of get done by traditional compute. That even though GPUs are kind of they're not necessarily traditional compute, you know, that's more like the CPU, there's general purpose things, but it's sort of, maybe that's the middle ground. CPU, GPU, quantum, it's kind of, that's the road to righteousness or something. It's sort of, that's the timeline,
Maybe.
or the logical
I
sort of
don't. I
steps.
don't. I don't know if it will completely replace, honestly, the classical computing, but it will. I think it will transform classical computing, and it will take it to the next. I mean, none of that's ever stood still in time, right? So I think the infrastructure, the GPUs that you work today, have nothing to do with, you know, what you were working with 20 years ago,
Sure.
right? So I think it'll help with that evolution. And there's just so much in the hardware that quantum computing needs. And you touched on cooling. Sort of, you do a lot around that.
Yes.
Quantum computing needs an absolute truckload of cooling to make that a reality, right? Because they operate at absolute zero temperatures. And that's actually one of the scaling problems with quantum computing. And so, you know, this need for deep and heavy and sophisticated infrastructure is not going away anytime soon.
Totally.
It is one of the scaling challenges. I'd like to think of it a little bit like, you know, you look back at those photos in the, what is it, the 50s and 60s, whatever, and there's like, here's a computer, and it's like, you know, in a room, you know, it's a massive
4
room, a
kilobytes.
warehouse. Yeah, that's right.
Storage.
And, you know, and you have the quote of this guy going, one day this will fit in the palm of your hand. And what do you know? You do know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, Steve Jobs walks on stage, and
yeah.
that's funny.
It's going to be a bit like that for quantum, I reckon. You know, at the moment we need like I think to cool, so I think the estimate is to get a fault tolerant quantum computer that is truly useful, you need at least a million qubits or 1,000 working qubits,
Yeah.
and to cool that, to make that a possibility, you're talking a couple of skyscrapers worth of cooling equipment, right? Which is insane, and they're working on that problem, and there are breakthroughs every day. But
Yeah.
you know, I'd like to think that, you know, give it 50 years, you know, as per the, you know, the example I gave earlier, that'll be like, wow, can you imagine? We need
It's
all this
shrunken
cooling
into this
equipment. Yeah.
quantum in the palm of your hand. I'm curious actually, and I don't know if you know the scale of the power needs of those things. Like I have a reference point in my head of, you know, standard traditional compute, but like obviously all that cooling that you know, it requires a ton of power. I hope, because what's happening in the data center world is that it's a land grab, both physically and, you know, logically, for power for land, you know, and the pockets of power, both the supply, the distribution, you know, are very difficult, and they're slow, right? You know, it takes a long time to build power. There's a lot of talk about getting the need for nuclear and kind of revisiting that as the only real,
Yes.
you know, large
Interesting, right?
scale, somewhat sustainable way to sort of do it, for the nuclear kind of waste that you create. But I mean, you know, the scale of which you can't get if the sun don't sun and the wind don't wind, you know, and hydro, you know, don't hydro, you have a challenge on the sustainable energy front. And so nuclear seems to be that option. But I'm just curious if, because I just haven't thought of it or researched it really, is the there's a need for the power from the quantum folk. But I'm curious, some of the challenges have been these noisy qubits, right? So they're error prone, and have these challenges, you know, to get rid of the noise and improve the signal. Is that the biggest problem? Is it funding? Is it expertise? Is it like, how does this commercialize? Like what's the first thing to do?
Yeah, wow.
Unlimited
So
budget.
many
What do you
areas
do
you could
first?
explore there. Well, firstly, you know, there's the issue of getting quantum computers to that size and scale where it's truly useful first. And you're quite right. This idea of noisy qubits sort of translates and having a quality qubit or fidelity is really important and difficult. So I touched on earlier that
Can I ask a
qubits are
really
super.
simple, I'm sorry, Chloe, but it's a really simple question. If you have a stable qubit, like you got one, is
Yes.
it stable in that moment, or is it stable for a period of time? Does it deteriorate over time? Do you need to, if it gets too hot,
Yeah.
or like, how do you stabilize and keep that thing? Now I've got
Yeah. Okay.
two.
So
Now I've got three. Like, how
yeah,
does that work?
how long can you keep a
What's the
qubit
shelf life?
coherent? Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
please use
again, they're
by
working on
Tuesday.
that like every day, like they're
Yeah.
having breakthroughs, and I'm probably not across the latest, but how long can you keep your qubit in that superposition of one and zeros and the entanglement going and all of that? So that it is extremely sensitive, right? And it's why is it it's very sensitive to the environment. So anything like when they say the minute you observe it, it collapses, right?
Yes.
And that's because it's sensitive to radiation, light, heat, everything. Hence, the minute, for example, you try to look at it, you need to put light on it. Do you know what I mean? It collapses. So, which is also why we've never been able to observe what goes on
Okay.
to a qubit in those states, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But you so to help maintain a qubit in this state of superposition, we know the colder the better for a
Mhm.
start, and that hence the cooling and everything has to be absolute zero. I think there are 5 major qubit technologies, and each of them have their unique challenges as to how to keep them in superposition. You got photonic qubits, which is what PsiQuantum used, which is the example I used earlier. But a lot of the major tech companies have invested in superconductive qubits. there's spin qubits, neutral qubits, trapped ions, and each of those are slightly different, but there's some commonality. One is the cooling and environmental control. That is a massive challenge, and so how the infrastructure needed to keep a qubit isolated and super cold is one thing. The other thing is, when you talk about infrastructure, because they're so sensitive, the tiniest, slightest imperfections in your infra can make the difference as well. So I'm going to, what's the word I'm looking for? But being very precise in your manufacturing and your controls makes a massive difference. So you've got a lot of companies out there who have partnered with, and trying to use as much existing technology to speed the progress of quantum computing. So PsiQuantum is partnered with global foundries, for example, so that semiconductor fab, and they use them to manufacture their photonic chips, which are unique in itself. But they're trying to use existing tech, precise tech, and all those techniques as much as possible, trying not to reinvent. They want to do quantum, not chip manufacturing. But it's really important that they invest in chip manufacturing, because without that, they're kind of never going to get there in that scaling. Trying to keep their qubits coherent piece. So computation coherence impacts computation speed. How many gate operations can a qubit go through before it collapses, which is why that's really important. And you've got this idea of multi-qubit networking. So we want more qubits so that we can calculate more and interesting things. I touched on 1,000 qubits, or 1 million if you include the noisy qubits, that can be linked to one another to perform gate operations more readily. But of course, the more qubits you have, the more difficult it is to manage and control that environment. So those are just, I think I've touched on a number of aspects there of some of the challenges. So right now, companies are investing to progress quantum computing in those areas. But you touched on talent and development, developing. I mean, that is by far and above something that is going to be a massive problem, to be honest. There's not enough awareness about quantum computing out there, and so by the time we have a breakthrough and it becomes, I think, something pretty critical for companies to be on top of, we're not going to have the talent that we need to work in organizations, to help mitigate these risks. So I think absolutely investing in quantum talent as soon as possible is going to be really important. I think there was a McKinsey has done some great work in this space, and I think they were saying that less than half of all quantum available roles will be filled by 2025.
Right.
And you project that out to when there's a real burning platform, and I reckon that's going to be really tough, to be honest. So so I mean, but if I were to sort of lift your question up a little bit, if I was an organization, what should I be doing right now? I would be investing in quantum resilient algorithms to protect my systems. Because the bad actors are going to come in, they're going to harvest your data now to decrypt it later. And that's already happening, and that's well documented. So you don't need a quantum computer to fight quantum computer, at least in theory. You just need better mathematics. So if you can encrypt your data with quantum resilient algorithms, you're in a much better place for when there is a breakthrough. And by that time, you're probably going to be replacing your cybersecurity systems with QKD or something similar, quantum key distribution. And that's a brand new, honestly, cybersecurity protection system. And I think, what concerns me is when you look at particularly the very large and less nimble organizations out there, the time it takes to plan and swap out a major system, be it your site, all your cybersecurity, anything that's encrypted with cybersecurity is this example, but or an ERP system is something everyone can probably relate to. It takes years to get to that point. And so if we have a breakthrough in 5 years' time, and let's assume Shaw's algorithm isn't broken for maybe 7, you're going to start now on encrypting your data, planning, figuring out how you're going to do this, getting the talent on board, who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And you don't need a full team today, but you probably want at least 1 or 2 people who know their stuff.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah.
a daunting thing to think about when it's hard to get folks to like change their password from password 123.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, exactly.
I'd love to,
Yeah.
I wonder what a quantum protected or a quantum resilient password that looks, when you log into your machine, it's like, well, I'm just going to be typing here for the morning to put my password in.
Well, I'm hoping we will have gotten rid of passwords,
No, I know.
honestly, Nick. I mean, I find the ridiculous things. We need like digital IDs, and I think Sweden has cracked that sort of digital ID piece. They've got a thing. I think it's called it's Bank ID,
Okay.
and 90% of the population has one. And it basically does away with the need for passwords and the need to give away sensitive information to like 50 companies to prove you are who you are. So it exists. So I think we need to move in that way. So I'd like to think passwords will be a thing of the past.
There's a lot of movement in that
I'm
space.
ever hopeful.
Yeah, Microsoft's done a lot of things there. There's, passphrases and there's a whole bunch of other things. And
Yeah.
two-factor came in and that's been broken a bunch of different times in different ways. And the progress is good. The one thing that's I find this fascinating is that, obviously the pushback to some of that stuff is like privacy, right? So like you can't have a digital ID because then the government knows everything about me, can control me, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of funny because some of the folks that come out with those statements then just, bring up their phone and they're like, got Facebook and Instagram and different things on them. And you go, well, that's not, you got to practice what you preach to some. If you bring out like a burner Nokia 3200 phone, then okay, cool. You practice what you preach. But what I find interesting is I spent a bit of time in Europe at the start of last year, and the Europeans, are really privacy sensitive and about sovereign data and stuff that happens in Europe stays in Europe and within country, and that's great. But a lot of them use it's actually WhatsApp is probably more prevalently used in Europe than it is in the States, and yet that's going to Meta and you can argue wherever you want about that, but it's just kind of funny well, not funny, but interesting the dynamic between the privacy is really important and yet in every walk of life and every step you take out the front door, even in your own home, your privacy is kind of being broken open to use modern technology to communicate, to open your front door. You've got a digital lock on it. You've got security cameras around your house. You've got all these things, and so it's almost impossible to avoid and protect your privacy without touching something that you aren't in control of, and someone has access to your bits, and bytes. So yeah, it's I find that fascinating. It's just it's you couldn't be a digital nomad, or you couldn't be a nomad and be non-digital and live off the grid for very long. But maybe quantum can give us that. Maybe we can we can all live off the land and just return to cavemen and women and it'll be better for our health and everything's going to be wonderful.
I hope not. I hope not.
You like your modern smartphone, a
Yeah.
microwave connected to the internet, and a fridge that tells you you're out of milk, and yeah.
I do. Look, I think privacy is extremely important. I think you're right, though. Increasingly, it's a luxury, and there's a real trade-off that is not being. You're right. I think intellectually, people love and value their privacy, but in practice, if it's inconvenient for them,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
they tend to just
Convenience
sort of throw that out the
rules.
door pretty quickly. So I think it's a really complex topic, and how we're well, what is the future of privacy is, I think, a really interesting topic. Will it become a luxury in the future? Is this something, is this a losing battle, or will we evolve and improve our tech to the point where we're capable of protecting ourselves? I'd like to think we can. But I don't know if the answer
Ever
is
the
really
optimist.
obvious right now. Ever the optimist. And you're right, EU is perhaps ahead of the game on this. They're probably fighting for it the hardest. Rightly or wrongly, there's a lot of regulation out there, a lot of restrictions out there. And it comes with trade-offs as well. So, there's a lot of criticism on, how it could be curbing innovation, and it's adding bureaucracy, and
Such a
it's making it
balance,
harder. Yeah. But is it, at least they're striving in the right direction. The intentions are right, but is it the right way to go about it? I don't have the answers to that, but
no, I don't know
I
either.
think there are trade-offs everywhere.
I like the analogy
it's
of
not easy to get right.
Yeah, I always like the analogy. You've got to crack a couple of eggs to make an omelet, right? And so there's always a trade-off of there's some kind of impact. It's not everything's going to be great.
You're seeing that as well with AI regulation and safety in
Totally.
AI, and the EU is also ahead of the game in that space. And I think different countries are definitely showing very different risk appetites in that space. And how do we want to crack down on this? What does it mean? EU have taken a very outcomes-based approach, so risk and outcomes-based, and they go, well, if it's this type and level of risk, then we're expecting these types of controls. How you get there is kind of like not our problem, which is good and bad. I mean, it's good in that it leaves the door open to a lot of innovation in that space to achieve those goals. Bad in that if those are the expectations and you're not quite sure how you're going to get there, that could be a challenge as well, right?
Totally.
But I do think to that point that ethics in AI are really important. It's a really important space, and you just have to look at. I don't think the market can self-regulate necessarily, but what the regulation looks like, is an open question, right?
Totally. I think there's been a lot of regulation from a sustainability point of view with regards to digital infrastructure coming out of the EU and the countries around. How do we ensure that we can compete but also deploy this stuff at scale and with data centers use a lot of energy. How do they do it sustainably, efficiently, and that's impacted a lot of countries and ability to build today and build tomorrow. But one thing actually I'm pleased with the EU that they've done is they've forced Apple to change from Lightning to USB-C. That's a win, and that's a good win. And I think we should all, be thankful for that. But weirdly, it's just on a weird topic, a side note, it's made Apple have 4 different pencils, that they sell today. So because there you go, right? So there's 4 versions of those things, which is
really, I didn't realize
you can buy 4 now. There's, all across their portfolio, and that just seems a little unhinged. It doesn't seem very inefficient. Yeah. So, maybe those are the eggs that are getting cracked, is that the consumers have 4 pencils to choose from. Anyway, Chloe, any other questions or topics or things we didn't, what didn't I ask you? We covered a lot of ground and a lot of different topics, which is wonderful. So I thank you for
we
for
have.
that. Is there anything I
No, thank you.
talk about?
I think we've touched on a lot of fantastic topics today. Look, I've loved chatting. I've particularly loved telling you the HivePix story and the problems we're trying to solve and how that's evolving as well. So I think that's a really exciting part of my life, and I am I'm really excited to see how we solve those problems for big supply chains and ecosystems. So that's fun. And then quantum is a passion in my life, as you know, where it is going to be the future of computing, of cybersecurity. It will solve a lot of problems. I do believe that quantum breakthrough is going to happen in the next 5 years, but it'll just be the first iteration, right? That's going to be the first fault tolerant quantum computer, which will solve real problems. but then you'll get, version 2, a year later. It's a bit like generative AI. Chat GPT-3 is
It's the
not as impressive
watershed
as what you're
moment, and then
seeing.
it just takes off.
Yeah, and then every other iteration is the next wow moment, and everyone goes wow. So I think quantum's going to be a bit like that. But yeah, it's not for another 5 years. But I think an important takeaway for business needs to be you need to start now because
Yeah.
when it happens, the opportunity side, you could choose when you want to do that. I mean, you might get left behind by a competitor who overtakes you, sure. But for cybersecurity, I don't think you're going to have a choice. I think it's going to be one of those moments where you're going to have to protect yourself and your data.
Batten down the hatchet.
So yeah. So
Very cool.
that timing is out of our hands in some ways.
Yeah. It's great. It's lovely talking to you. I learned a ton of stuff. Hopefully, other folks will can learn some things too, and reach out to you about HivePix to learn more about the company, about the product, about the services, about maybe doing a POC or like chatting with you about what that might look like.
Absolutely.
But this has been great. I really appreciate it, Chloe. Lovely to have you, and enjoy the rest of your time here in the States, albeit short. Let us know when you're back, and we'll catch up for an in-person catch up, and maybe
Awesome.
we could do a take two.
I
You
am
tell me
back
all the
fairly
success you've had in
regularly.
a short time.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Thanks, Nick. So I appreciate you having me on here. It's been a real pleasure talking to you as well.
Awesome. Well, take care, safe travels, and we'll chat to you soon.